Go back a few decades, China was one of the poorest countries in the entire world, the sick man of Asia. And one of the biggest banks on Wall Street is called HSBC Bank. What does HSBC stand for? That's Hong Kong Shanghai Banking Corporation. This was a bank that was set up for the purpose of beating down China's economy and using opium to do it, right? Opium was flooded into China. There were 2 opium wars where the British Empire sent soldiers to die to make sure that they had the right to send narcotics into China, and not just narcotics, but all kinds of cheap products to make sure no Chinese manufacturers could arise, to keep that country in deep poverty. And what they call the Great Revival of Chinese civilization, it began with Dr. Sun Yat-sen. Now, Dr. Sun Yat-sen was the founder of the nationalist KMT movement in China. And that, what we call the Mao suit here in the USA, that blue suit, that was the Dr. Sun Yat-sen uniform. It was the common people's outfit. That's what he wore. And his first act was to go to a temple. The peasants in China, they would be kind of humiliated by their landlords, and they would have to make sacrifices to these ancient deities. They would have to kind of bow before these statues. And Dr. Sun Yat-sen, he went to a temple and he smashed these idols that they were forced to worship. And he said, don't do this. This is backwardness. This is primitive. We need to have science here. We need to be advanced. We need to have reason. And that was the beginning. Dr. Sun Yat-sen's movement in China was the 3 principles. The first was independence. The second was democracy. And the third was the people's livelihood. And what exactly did the people's livelihood mean? Well, it's understood commonly that it was some vague concept of socialism, some vague understanding that the government had an obligation to care for the people. And what people also don't know is that Dr. Sun Yat-sen was a good friend of Vladimir Lenin, and that he applied to join the Communist International. Now, he wasn't allowed to fully join the Communist International because he was not a Marxist, but he was a good friend of Lenin, and Dr. Sun Yat-sen was actually an observer of the Communist International. He was allowed to attend the gatherings of the Comintern. And when the Chinese Communist Party emerged, they had a very different orientation. You know, Trotsky wanted the Chinese Communist Party to be hostile to Dr. Sun Yat-sen and expose them as a non-communist, non-pure movement. But Lenin and later Stalin said that the communists ought to join Dr. Sun Yat-sen's movement, and that the approach that they ought to have is to say, you know, if you really want independence, if you really want democracy, if you really want to improve the people's livelihood, then you got to become a communist, and you got to use Marxism-Leninism to do it. And that was the approach. It wasn't a sectarian approach. It wasn't a hostile approach. It was this winning approach. And it's because of that that the Chinese Communist Party grew from 30 people in the basement of a women's dormitory to millions of people during the 1920s. But as we know, Dr. Sun Yat-sen died, and Chiang Kai-shek ended up taking over the KMT movement. And Chiang Kai-shek was in league with the American big corporations and with the British bankers, and he started killing communists. So the communists were forced to flee from the cities. Very famous. They fled from the cities, and that's where you get rural people's war and Mao and the guerrilla warfare out in the countryside, where they're going to isolated rural areas and leading peasants to overthrow their landlords and redistributing land. And they eventually liberated so much territory in the countryside, they established the Chinese Soviet Republic. You know, all these people that are like talking about being Maoists and all that, I bet they've never even heard the phrase Chinese Soviet Republic. Well, they established the Chinese Soviet Republic in 1931. But of course, you know, the rulers of the old system weren't going to tolerate that. So Chiang Kai-shek, he had some allies in Germany. There was a man named Hans von Seeckt, who was in charge of Germany in 1934. Think about that. Well, he sent a guy named Hans von Seeckt, a military general, to be an advisor to Chiang Kai-shek and how to put down the Chinese Soviet Republic. And they surrounded it, they subjected the Chinese Soviet Republic to a state of siege, and they moved in and they eventually crushed it. And Mao and his forces were forced to retreat up into the mountains. And that's when they talk about the Long March. That was the beginning of the Long March, as they were fleeing up into the mountains to get away from the crushing of the Chinese Soviet Republic. I wish I could have been there. Wish I could go back in time to say to Chiang Kai-shek and Hans von Seeckt, as they stand there and they watch Mao retreating up into the mountains, thinking, that's it, communism's over in China, we got him. Wish I could stand there and say to him, hey there, enjoy yourself. This is your time. Live it up. Enjoy it while you can. But I've got a feeling you're not going to be too happy when Mao comes down from that mountain and he's 10 times stronger than he was when he went up. And you're not going to be too happy when Mao kidnaps Chiang Kai-shek and forces him to sign an alliance against the Japanese invaders. You're not going to be too happy when, during the fight against Japan, the Red Army becomes the heroes of the whole world. When there's a best-selling book called Red Star Over China by Edgar Snow that's selling out in Europe and in the United States, where Mao is the hero fighting the Japanese invaders. Everyone wants to be like Mao all over the world. You're not going to be too happy when they eventually set up the People's Republic of China. So have your fun while it lasts. Enjoy yourself, Chiang Kai-shek. Enjoy yourself, Hans von Sect. But I got a feeling you ain't going to be happy too much longer, because A does not equal A. And you never step into the same river twice.